welcome to the In Gas We Trust podcast. We got special guest Ed Donaldson, community leader, also pretty knowledgeable in terms of cannabis and especially the equity space. Both born and raised in San Francisco, and we're going to talk about some cannabis equity.
That's an interesting topic, very interesting. Because when you say equity and you say compassion, I kind of think the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a place in the industry where cannabis equity ties in with the whole idea of compassion. And when you really think about it, that's how cannabis started, especially here in San Francisco. I mean, you had the folks like Dennis Perone, Brownie Mary, those folks. I was a teenager then. I was like 13, 14, 15 years old, reading the newspaper and watching the news and seeing them getting chased around by the DEA and how the district attorney at the time, Terrence Hallinan, he wouldn't cooperate and prosecute them or arrest them or whatnot. And so, but they were doing good things, in giving cannabis away to people who needed it.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. It's a medicine. So,
So do you feel like that's one of the biggest issues around like legalization and the changes that have been implemented?
Well, I think legalization didn't have the effect that we wanted it to have. I think that there was some negative consequences to legalization. I mean, it brought a spirit of competition to the industry or whatnot. But, I mean, when you think about the culture of cannabis, it's more around cooperation. And so that spirit of competition or whatnot sort of kind of disrupted the natural spirit of cannabis, which was, people getting along and working together and stuff like that. And so a lot of people in the compassionate circles don't necessarily, approve of or care for Prop 64. And so that's very interesting.
Yeah. What would you say your definition of equity in cannabis is?
Well, I go back to compassion. I mean, as a teenager here in San Francisco growing up, I saw on the news and saw in the newspaper, what, folks like Dennis Perone, Brownie Mary, and other folks were doing. I mean, they were actually, they had connections to the Triangle, and they were going up there getting cannabis and bringing it back and giving it away to people who had cancer or people who had AIDS, to folks who needed it. And, and it did a lot of good in terms of healing people.
Yeah.
And so, to see that, and then to understand the history around the plant and how it was, unfortunately demonized when it's really a medicine.
Yeah.
So I start there. To me, it's not like a product. It's not like a commodity. It's a medicine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And speaking to, my relationship with cannabis, it started at a young age because, us as black folks growing up in relational type households, we're around uncles, cousins, aunties, and stuff like that. And so I have aunts and uncles that are not too much older than me. And so I saw a lot growing up, especially as like a young kid, 4 or 5 years old, because you wandering around the house and getting into stuff, right? And so I stumbled upon a whole lot of stuff, right? And saw it. And it was no coincidence that by the age of 8, my mother's youngest brother actually stuck a joint in my mouth. And but he made sure that I was asleep before my mother got back, right?
Yeah.
I was in the bed. Yeah, we're going to put him to sleep. But by 8 years old, but by 11, 12 years old, we was smoking every day. And the crazy part about it was that we didn't understand the connection between athletics, basketball, and sports and things of that nature and cannabis, because we were playing basketball every day. When I say every day, growing up, 7 days, sometimes 6 days, sometimes we'd give it a break one day or whatever,
Yeah.
though, but we were always looking for basketball games around the city. But simultaneously, we smoking cannabis, not realizing the positive effect that it was having on us in terms of muscle recovery and stuff like that. Because when you look at the miles that we put on our legs and stuff like that playing basketball, youngsters today just don't know.
Yeah.
And I still, in my cannabis use is primarily to ease some of the, joint pains and things of that nature, whatnot, that I've grown into.
Yeah. That's interesting that you say that, because I've been like following Ricky Williams.
Yeah.
Like he got a brand called Heisman, and they really been pushing to make cannabis be accepted. But it's crazy that he missed out on so much money because it wasn't in his day.
Well, the NFL and NBA, they've softened their stance in regards to cannabis, but it's based on the research, that's been done and put forward, a lot of which has been done outside of the United States. But now, the country is beginning to catch on to the importance of, researching and getting ahead of, the current trend, because it is a trend that's not going to go backwards because of how it started. I tell people, when you really look at the history of cannabis, it was women, like it is now, right? We're all upset, right? It was women who couldn't get the medicine for their children, right? And the goal of life is to leave the world in a better condition for the next generation. And so here it is, you got women who were breaking the law and crossing the borders, and basically had their husband in tow. Like, if you don't figure this out with us, right, now how to get little Jimmy over here to get this medicine, right? Right, we ain't gonna be together, right? Because I'm gonna leave you, right? There was a lot of that going on, and so women, same as it was, like if you look back in history, the temperance movement that brought about prohibition with alcohol, it was because of women. And it's an interesting story because in the Midwest, they had an abundance of wheat and barley and everything that they were growing, but they didn't necessarily have the means to transport it out of the area to the markets, and so they had to figure out what to do with it real fast before it spoiled. So they started making alcohol out of it, right? And then eventually they started opening up bars and taverns and whatnot, and then the women had to go find their husbands. They were in the bars and taverns drunk. And so they pitched a fit, and that brought about prohibition. And so women, they got the power to change things. And it's no coincidence that it's a feminine plant, with cannabis, the hemp.
Yeah, the real flowers that we consume come from the female plant. And preferably the female without seeds.
Yeah. So, interesting history, interesting parallels in history too.
So I know you did some work around equity. You got Universal Soldier. I know you did some work with a few different companies. You want to speak on that?
Yeah. So, I look at life in general as like an adventure. And I'm always looking for something to get into. And so when the Cannabis Equity Program came along, and I saw the opportunities that were available to actually get in on the ground level and get involved, I started out working with NUG over in Oakland. They had a huge grow facility and warehouse where they were producing cannabis packaging and whatnot, and they had all of their accounts where they had drivers and whatnot that were, going out doing deliveries and whatnot, and they couldn't find a driver or couldn't maintain a steady driver for San Francisco. And I was like, I'll do it. So I raised my hand and started doing that. And what it did, it gave me the opportunity to meet a lot of the industry players and whatnot, and owners and general managers and buyers and stuff like that inside of the dispensaries. One of the things I noticed about that there was a lot of turnover. So you might see a buyer here, and then next thing you know, you see them over there. And so it's a real dynamic kind of industry or whatnot. But from that perspective, I had a bird's eye view with NUG, and made some decent money and whatnot in it and whatnot. I actually caught the tail end of the illegal cannabis industry or whatnot, and so I saw a lot of duffel bags, product and money or whatnot. And so it was just like, wow, to see that. And then also to understand the whole dynamics of the state. Right, and I started realizing that there was more than just San Francisco, which is important, you know, because the biggest cannabis market in the state is Los Angeles. And so, you know, having a foot, you know, Nug has a foot down in Los Angeles or whatnot, or at least that was a place that they focused on quite a bit or whatnot. And from there, I transitioned to NorCal, and it was like night and day. You know, NorCal and Nug. I mean, Nug was, you know, sort of kind of, you know, shooting from the hip, where, you know, NorCal, you know, understood the changes, you know what I'm saying, that the industry was undergoing, and they understood that they had to change with it. And I appreciate them because, you know, they are legacy people. They are, you know, compassion people, you know, folks that have been here from the very beginning of the cannabis industry or whatnot, you know, in the state. And to see them, you know, make that decision to say, hey, look, we have to participate and in a real way, you know, as a real company. And so that's what they stood up, was a real company where it was mind blowing for me to be in an office where, you know, I'm working as the community development director, but I'm in an office with the marketing team, you know, the majority of which was from Twitter. And so these was like some major guys who really understood startups, you know, and how to put a marketing plan together, and how to put, you know, the products together. And so to be in that environment and to be able to work with them, because in a startup, you know, you have to have an entrepreneur mentality. It's not like, oh, this is my job over here and I'm only going to stay over here. It's like, no, you know, I don't have nothing to do. Let me see what I can help with or whatnot. Because what was instilled in us by the chairman from the very beginning, he said that, you know, he told me, you know, point blank, he said, we don't allow things to fall through the cracks around here. He said, if we don't have an answer, he said, we either buy it, you know, but we're gonna figure it out one way or another or whatnot. And so I appreciated that because they didn't spare expenses when it came to finding answers. And then I'll say this, I had the opportunity to be a part of the launching of 6 products with NorCal, one of which is a brand called Lolo, which just happened to be one of the leading brands in the state right now. And to see the thinking that went into that product to where it's now the leading brand, one of the leading brands in the state, you know, that's basically what I came into the industry for, was to begin to understand, like, you know, how do you go about building a business model, you know what I'm saying, for cannabis, you know, and what are some of those key variables or whatnot that you look for. And so to be a part of that process, it was amazing. And so what happened in late 2019, the investor community basically, you know, shifted and began to, you know, create the expectation for profits out of, you know, folks that they were investing in. So what they basically said is that we're not going to invest anymore into infrastructure and growth. We want to see you guys turn a profit because we've been in long enough with you or whatnot. And so that was like, you know, an important moment in the industry, or it was a shakeout. It was one of several shakeouts that happened in the industry where NorCal was able to pivot and fall back upon its, you know, its huge capacity around growth, you know, and then control its brands. You know what I mean? It's amazing. So you know, I look at them and, you know, and the fact that they've been able to maintain themselves in a tough industry right now, and it goes to, you know, the thought process that went into creating a company. And it hasn't been without pain, though. I mean, and everybody has gone through that. And so I'll say this last thing in regards to NorCal. I took my community development work and created Universal Soldier. And so at NorCal, we had 5 pillars of community development. And Universal Soldier, we had 5 pillars of equity. Where what I was trying to do, I wanted to make Universal Soldier actually what we did internally, but because of the objective of NorCal, where they were looking not only at equity but also compassion, they knew they had to service, you know what I'm saying, other audiences or other communities within the industry or whatnot. And so it kind of, you know, it was kind of spread out a little bit, but I just took it and turned it into Universal Soldier, you know, and one of the things I'm doing with it is the creation of a house of brands, where well, at one point, some point or another, I'll begin to put out brands,
Yeah.
that's representative of who I am or what Universal Soldier itself represents, going back to the medicine piece of it and the compassion piece of it.
Yeah, I like that you talk about like medicine and the compassion aspect. And one thing that you mentioned to me before is that a very small percentage of the industry is actually, flower and people smoking, and and a lot more of it is more medicinal and like micro dosing and
Yeah. So I mean, with all the excitement with the beginning of the industry, there was a huge focus upon what's called the stoner community, which is those folks who have been in the industry, that will continue to be in the industry or whatnot because they have a relationship with cannabis, that necessitates that or whatnot. And then you have everything outside of that, which is like about 85% of the market, right? And there's been some estimations as to what that represents, not only in San Francisco, but also nationally or whatnot. But that percentage of the market, that 85% of the market, is much larger than that 15% of the market. And the growth potential of the 85% of the market is much greater than what the growth potential of the stoner market is. And so, anybody that's in the industry, and if you're focused on compassion or medicine, that would be the space to be in. Because it's as simple as like mothers. Going back to mothers again, oftentimes they just need a little something to take the edge off.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to be, out of their mind or nothing like, but they just need something to take the edge off. And that may even be CBD.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But, a gummy or something like that, where, my relationship with people, I find myself offering or recommending those types of things to folks, especially when I see folks who are stressing, right, to take off the edge.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I feel like with that being said, we got cannabis equity applicants, and we have like cannabis brands that have come up, equity brands, cannabis equity dispensaries, and I feel like where they fall short is they miss that. They miss that piece, and I feel like a lot of people get into it just because, it's just selling weed. It's
right.
They think it's easy, but it's not easy. It's business, and you gotta really think about it from that perspective. And also, like you gotta move calculated and strategic. You gotta have that startup mindset in order to succeed when you're going up against.
Well, it goes back to the infusion of the capitalistic spirit into cannabis, where it changed a lot of people, or a lot of people had to change because the impetus was now different than what it was before, and so that ruined a lot of relationships with people. There's a lot of people that's out there that don't even talk to each other because of what happened, through all of the shakeouts and everything, who got beat and whatnot. But I would say from a equity standpoint, I think that hindsight is 20/20. I think that if we were honest with ourselves, that in looking back, we would probably look at the cannabis industry as like a revenue source for the community, not necessarily for us as individuals, because of the impact that cannabis has had, or the criminalization of our community has had. That in looking at it as a revenue source, then consequently you're going to treat it more as a revenue source, where you're more or less going to put people in positions where they can succeed at. How you were speaking to people who were not necessarily suited for certain positions or whatnot, but just because they're not suited for one position, that doesn't mean they can't be, suited for another position. But if we would have looked at it as a whole versus as individuals, and looked at it as a revenue source for our community versus as, a source of income for ourselves, I think we would have treated it different. And so that's the spirit that I bring to Universal Soldier, in terms of what, in terms of rolling out what I want to roll out and am rolling out in the industry or whatnot. And when I say that, and it goes back to the thinking around my relationship with cannabis and how it came about. It came about in my community, right? It didn't necessarily come about in other folks' community and how they experienced cannabis. And so with the merger of the various communities together, it became difficult for a lot of us to find our place, so to speak, in the equity industry or whatnot. And so I realized then that we had to create it, and that no one else was going to do it, you know what I'm saying, but us. You know what I'm saying? And that was the challenge that was placed before us. And so I think that as we go forward and we look at it now, and we look at the folks who are still, you know, have a relationship with the plant and who are still involved one way or another with, you know, the business side of the industry, I think it speaks to, you know, who, you know, them knowing their why as to why they're in the industry or why they were doing what they were doing. So, which is important, because if you don't know your why,
what are you doing it for?
Right, it'll show. It'll show. And so, but hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah. So what have been some of the successes or like victories in terms of cannabis equity, and where do we need to pivot, and you know, like, in order to have the greatest impact or have an impact that, you know, make a difference in our community.
Well, you said pivot. And so every time there's a shakeout, you have to, you know, recognize what your pivot is going to be. And so this here is a pivot. You know what I'm saying? Being able to give voice to what, you know, the issues are around cannabis from an equity standpoint, and to build upon that, you know what I'm saying? That's huge or whatnot. And so, you know, I encourage you to continue this. You know what I'm saying, and continue, you know, going through the industry and finding people, you know, to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we overlook, you know, our greatest strength, which is us, ourselves, where oftentimes we'll look to other people to be like, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to do this, and not necessarily think about what it is that we're going to do. And I think we're in that moment now where we're realizing that if we don't do something for ourselves, then there's nothing that's going to get done per se for us or whatnot. And so, you know, a few of us may benefit from things or whatnot, but, you know, as far as like the overall, you know, condition of the community, it's not going to change or whatnot. It's not going to get any better.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, why are you doing what you're doing? So
Kind of like that saying, we all we got.
We all we got. We all we got. You know, and we have to be able to put our heads together, and we have to bring a startup mentality, because if you look at startups and how, like, going back to NorCal, right, the core team, there was about 6 or 7 individuals who either had worked together, done some stuff together, you know, one person brought this to the table, the other brought that to the table, whatnot, and so there wasn't a whole lot of duplicity. You know what I mean? Everybody was able to function within, you know, where their core strengths was, right? And so I sat back and I admire that. I'm saying this is how it's done, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, we end up in situations where all of us want to be the chief, and there's not enough Indians or whatnot. I don't care where I end up as long as I'm a part of something productive. You know what I mean? And when you talk about, you know, having a company is not one person, it's not 2 people. A company is, you know, an entity that employs other people, you know, and help them to, you know, to get on their feet and do well for themselves or whatnot. And so, you know, we have to be, you know, clear about what it is, why we're doing what we're doing, and what our ultimate objective is. And like I said, I go back to it, we just overlook what our strengths are.
Yeah.
Right? Thinking that other folks are going to do something for us that they're not necessarily, you know, inclined to do or should be expected to do, for that matter. Yeah.
I mean, it's like how I look at life and like the world. It's like, it's all about accountability. You know what I mean? And then when I give somebody that power to say, oh, he gonna do this or they gonna do this, you know what I mean? I'm taking that power away from myself.
Right.
And the more accountable I am for my outcome, you know, the further I get. You know,
that's success. That's success. I mean, we all have our own individual missions that we own. You know what I mean? And, you know, when we put the responsibility on someone else, per se, you know, to fulfill what it is that's in us to do, you know, like you said, we're giving our personal power away. And that's why I said we overlook what our biggest strength is, which is our own personal power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you know, I'll say this too, you know, it really goes to self-love. And so that was the exciting thing about cannabis, was like knowing what the plant really represented. and then to know that, okay, they're legalizing this, or at least they're honoring what the plant itself stands for. And so if it's that and the influence that comes with that, through educating folks in our community, because a lot of us, who consume cannabis, we really don't understand, why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? And once we do, we'll be more aware around, how we're doing it, or whatnot, and we'll be less inclined to go after youngsters or criticize youngsters, because like in Bayview, there's amongst the older community, there's this backlash from the war on drugs around anything that's remotely they don't have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's a medicine, regardless of new research, they don't have nothing to do with it. And so, but we're at a time where younger generations, are taking over numerically or whatnot, but yet they consume it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like educating them as to why it is, and what it is that they oftentimes don't realize is that our community suffers from a cannabinoid deficiency, right? So meaning our bodies should naturally produce cannabinoids based on, the consumption of, the right foods. And so if your body is not naturally producing cannabinoids, it has to get it from somewhere, right? And so, we wonder why cannabis is so prolific. The use of it is so prolific in our community. And if we peel back a few layers, we realize, like, okay, cannabinoid deficiency, right? And it's something that those of us who don't use it should even consider thinking about, because when I rekindled my relationship with cannabis, I immediately lost about 25, 30 pounds. And it was because my, digestional tract was plugged. But the cannabis, the strain that I was attracted to, THCV, V as in Victor, it's a natural appetite suppressant. I didn't know that until I, began doing research, but it's those kind of things, because it can help to heal, situations that doesn't necessarily involve a doctor. Because my doctor, he and I had been having this tug of war for 10 years before about my need to lose, 25, 30 pounds. So when I came in the doctor's office, I'm smiling. He looking at me like, man, what happened, right? I told him cannabis. He's like, keep doing it. He's retired now, but he told me to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's crazy, because you would think the opposite.
Right. Right. I told him that was the only difference. I said, still exercising, still eating right. You know what I mean? I said, but I started consuming cannabis.
Yeah.
He was like, man. So.
What are your next steps in terms of the industry or?
Well, I think the greatest opportunity now is like with education. And so, from the very beginning of the inception or my involvement with the legal cannabis industry, it's always been about educating people. And so, despite what the changes, ups and downs that happen in the industry, I've always been one to educate people and teach people about cannabis and refer people to products or whatnot that they could potentially try. And so that's the space that I see myself in. It's like a healer, medicine, or whatnot. And so I'll continue to play that role. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to open more doors around the compassion side so that we could get, cannabis that could be distributed, to folks who need it, as well as like seniors and stuff like that. And so, that's the space for us to operate in, because that's a space where the impact of cannabis can be immediately seen and felt or whatnot, especially upon, those folks, older folks who experienced a lot of the war on drugs or the trauma from the war on drugs or whatnot. They need it. You know what I mean? And they're open to it too. But they're not gonna smoke it.
Yeah.
A lot of them ain't gonna smoke it, but they'll use topicals and stuff like that.
Edibles
and things like that. So, that's our space.
Yeah.
Right.
What qualifies a person to be an equity applicant?
Well, they came up with weird formulas. I put it this way. So I was telling somebody, when all of this was going on, and they were verifying people, it struck me that the fact that I went to public school and I grew up on the street that I did, it qualified me for the equity program. But then I got a partner that grew up 2 doors away. He went to Catholic school. He wasn't qualified.
Yeah.
but his experiences, life experiences, were the same as mine.
Yeah.
Right, and so, when stuff like that comes up or whatnot, there has to be a place where there's an exception, because I see those people as just as much a part of the industry or whatnot as anyone else. And so that's what I'm getting at, where us creating our own space where we remove those artificial barriers or whatnot, and we're inclusive of those folks that who share those same life experiences that we do in terms of being criminalized and stuff like that. And I think it's more so in the context of compassion. We have to figure out like how to like really stand up a compassion program in Bayview.
And some people argue that like cannabis equity is kind of like it's like a handout, or like it's they argue that it's unfair, kind of like they do about like diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like they.
Well, when I think about the past, I look at it like this: the past is, you can't go back and change anything, but you can damn sure learn from the past. And so, if you're not learning from the past, then that means you're repeating history over and over again, right? And so, I'm gonna go back, look at the past, understand why things are the way that they are, and I'm gonna be straight up about it. Like, okay, here we are, right? What are we gonna do? And so, people's response to that, it sometimes is welcoming, it's warm, sometimes it's not. And so, in terms of who I work with, I'm going to work with people who are of the same spirit that I am, right? And who honor life in general, right? Because when you talk in the discussions around equity and compassion, the case that I made was that if we're being compassionate toward a group of people because of what's going on with them or because of their condition, and we're saying over here with equity we want to be compassionate toward them, and what's the difference? Right? You're being compassionate in both cases.
Yeah.
Right? So there is no distinction, and so there was a general agreement around that idea at NorCal. Right? And so that was a group of people that I appreciated working with versus some of the more narrow type of definitions of cannabis and stuff like that, or equity or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I point to that as a good experience, in terms of being in the industry.
Yeah. Are there any equity dispensaries or brands that you would recommend, or?
Well, there's a couple that's out there. One is Sync, Ivan Castro. He's one of the more committed, people that I've seen, in terms of being out there in the industry or whatnot. I tend to sort of kind of sample like brands. From a pricing standpoint, store-bought cannabis has pretty much become equivalent to street cannabis. And so, when you look at that, it's obvious that there's still a lot of people that are participating in the illegal market, right? Because prices have become, are still such where that makes sense. But as the pricing comes down more and more in the legal cannabis market, it's going to be a detrimental effect, and it's already had a detrimental effect in terms of wiping out growers and stuff like that, where I don't know how much further it can go. And so it's created sort of somewhat of anomaly, especially when you think about on the front end, all of the upfront costs that you have to put out in terms of standing up a company or standing up a brand, right? And so, that's why I keep going back to a business model. It has to be a compassionate business model. It has to be something that's self-sufficient. Where you're not necessarily trying to make money off of it. You're just trying to sustain something, but help people. It's just a part of your culture. It's a part of what you do, in terms of helping people and stuff like that, versus more or less a money maker. And if it does make money, those profits should go back into the community to help rebuild community or whatnot. And I agree with people taking salaries and stuff like that, but all that stuff has to be above board. So
kind of more of a like non-profit kind of model.
Yeah, something like that. That's the only thing that makes sense. Right, because the costs. I mean, in San Francisco, the cost of growing is exceptionally high compared to like Napa or somewhere like that. And so, in fact, there's a huge cannabis park up in is it Napa or I think it's Sonoma.
A cannabis park?
Yeah, it's like an office park that one of the Canadian companies came in and bought, and then began subleasing to all of the brands and stuff like that. So everyone had some space up there. Like NorCal has a grow facility up there, and a manufacturing facility up there, and so it's because of taxes, because the excise taxes, I think like 0.5% or something like that. And so they made the decision that they're going to abandon, more so what they were doing in San Francisco and go up there.
Yeah, I mean the real estate is definitely a lot cheaper. Like out here, space is expensive. You know what I mean? They steady building up. You know what I mean? Because it's only so much space. It's only 7 miles by 7 miles.
Yep.
But thank you, man, for coming out.
Oh, yes, sir.
We'll probably do it again one day.
Yeah.
Someday soon.
Yeah. I mean, some closing remarks. Keep doing this, man. I mean, this is needed. We need platforms, to tell our stories and to share our experiences and whatnot. Where oftentimes, when we don't have those, whatnot, our voices sort of kind of, go away or whatnot. But this is the perfect time, especially, in society when you look at, all of what's going on. It's an opportunity to rebuild, And so the question that I'm challenging, not only myself and, everyone and young people too, is like, what are we building? You know what I'm saying? In this moment when, things around us are falling apart. Right, and it's clear that there's a transition that we're going through or we're experiencing or whatnot. But how are we leveraging that and how are we making the most of it? Based on what we know and based on what our experiences have been. So, man, keep it up. Keep it up for real, man. And I'd love to be a part of helping building some more more momentum around it. So definitely call on me.
Hey, yeah, appreciate you.
Yes,
Definitely
sir.
gonna keep it pushing. That's the only way I know.
No, yes, sir, brother. Yep.
Hey, what they say is just a matter of time and a matter of grind.
Right. I mean, staying in the present moment is important. I mean, it's easy to get discouraged, and step on the sideline or whatnot. But, we're here, to be in the present moment, experience life or whatnot. And so, making the most of it, and putting our best foot forward. I mean, that's what it's about. That's what I encourage anybody, especially young people. If you ain't pushing for something good, then what are you here for? What are you doing?
Yeah.
You wasting your time and everybody else's time, because they got to chase you around, some nonsense or whatnot. And so, that's why I say we're in that moment of clarity as a community or whatnot, where we recognizing that we're either going to build something as a community or destroy something as a community. So I'm on the side of building something. So.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man.
Oh, yes, sir, brother.
Let's keep building.
Yes, sir.
Hey, thank y'all. Appreciate y'all. It's the first episode of the In Gas We Trust podcast. And peep this. I sold weed before it was illegal.
Before it was legal, yeah.